Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're looking at the growing gap between EU nations on how to handle migrants. Already at the outset of an EU summit in Brussels, they've announced that a plan for a mandatory burden sharing when it comes to taking in migrants has indeed been scrapped. The divisions are growing. They run along an east-west and a north-south route. Before we talk about the north-south route, final word on the east-west route. And let's say hello once again to our guests. We're pleased to be joined by the Hungarian government spokesperson, Zoltán Kovács, who is in Budapest. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to the former Austrian foreign minister, now ambassador to France, Ursula Plasnik, joining us from Manchester, Sajjad Karim, member of the European Parliament, a conservative, and also joining us is our correspondent in Belgrade, Laurent Ruy. Laurent, you heard the arguments put forth. And by the way, Laurent, if I understand correctly, the Serbians have also been complaining to Hungary.
Well, the Serbians would like to be in contact with Hungary on this issue. And for the moment, there is an official meeting that is due to happen very early July. For the moment, Serbian officials said that they would not like to see this fence being built at the border between Serbia and Hungary, because, I mean, it's a way to block migrants also in Serbia. On the other hand, this would be most probably totally inefficient. I mean, building that fence, the Serbians say, would just increase the smuggling, would push some people maybe to dig tunnels under it. And they say in many cases in past history, it has been proven that fences are not so efficient for blocking people.
Zoltán Kovács, what's your reaction to that claim?
Well, building a security fence would not be without precedent within Europe. And as a matter of fact, the experience or the result coming from building fences is that there was a dramatic decrease in the number of those who entered those countries illegally. And this is, again, one of the major problems Hungary is facing. We are protecting not only Hungary's borders, but also Europe's borders. The Hungarian-Serbian border is a Schengen border. We have obligations and responsibilities we have to fulfill. We are afraid that building the fence is unavoidable. It certainly is not a solution to the existing problem, but a way to handle illegal migration. Again, all migrants entering Hungary and therefore the European Union for the past 6 months and before that last year are entering Hungary and therefore the European Union illegally. And we have reached in 1.5 years 100,000. Nobody's interest. It is in nobody's interest that this tendency and this flood of illegal migrants continues. We are open for dialogue. As a matter of fact, we are in continuous connection on a technical level with the Serbian authorities. And indeed, we are going to have a joint Hungarian-Serbian government meeting next Wednesday.
Sajjad Karim, let me ask you, because as you've heard, the rest of our panel, there's a split over whether or not that's a good use of money to build that fence. What's your view?
Well, whilst I understand quite the force of what Hungary is having to face, of course, the building of fences may seem like a very practical measure to put in place at this moment in time, but I don't believe that that actually deals with the problem as it stands at this stage. And of course, the psychological impact as well, that today Europe itself is fencing itself in, is not something that I believe is welcomed either by the Europeans or indeed any of our neighbouring countries and areas either. There needs to be much more support, however, provided to Hungary to ensure that the scale of the challenge that Hungary is facing, quite clearly on behalf of Europe, is something that Europe is standing shoulder to shoulder with Hungary on in terms of providing the types of solutions that are required. Now,
and who provides that support?
Well, of course, it has to come at a European Union level. And what needs to happen is that we must ensure that anybody that is trying to pass by through any of the borders, whether it's Hungary or anywhere else, is doing so in a regularized manner through the proper channels. Now, that is only going to happen if there are sufficient deterrents in place in the first instance not to irregularly enter, and then secondly, that the proper channels that are in place are working effectively so that genuine asylum seekers, when they present themselves with a genuine case, know that they are simply not going to be turned away under any pretense that may be put forward or used against them.
In part one of our discussion, we talked about it, them entering through Greece. Our reporter in Athens, Natalie Savarakis, sent through a report on people are coming through. We've seen the putting into place right now a phase one of an EU-wide response, which is intelligence gathering, basically patrolling the waters and stopping people from coming across. Is this the right way to be going?
It is one possibility. It would not be my personal favorite, to be honest, because I think that the problem is larger and bigger and cannot be dealt with in ways of deterrence or information gathering. These are important components, but I think we will have to distinguish more clearly between legal and illegal migration. We will have to work on the information side. We will have to set up information centers where people can have first-hand information from what type of migration is acceptable and might be even wanted, because the European economies are always looking for certain types of qualifications. And don't forget, the people who are trying to enter Europe also have extraordinary qualifications. And on the other hand, to find out who is here because he or she is literally running for their lives and will be recognized as internationally recognized refugees according to the Geneva Convention. So we will have to find better ways of filtering that out, of screening this. And this will not work without the cooperation of the countries on the southern side of the Mediterranean, on the eastern side of the Mediterranean. It is true, and has been pointed out by one of the participants in the debate, that in particular the neighboring countries of Syria and Iraq bear an incredible burden because they are the ones who get the first wave and the first needs.
What is it? Lebanon's population has gone up by a quarter, I believe.
Yes, it is quite extraordinary. Jordan, you have the same phenomenon. You also have a phenomenon in Turkey. But you also have the dark side of it, which is whole new industries being created of human trafficking, of smuggling, of ruthless people who make their business out of the plight and really the despair and the agony of those seeking shelter.
Before I let you go, Laurent Rui, we've heard about the mafia being involved in Libya. Are there those illegal smuggling businesses that are flourishing where you are?
Well, there are some smugglers in northern Serbia. I mean, and I've seen some of them, especially when there were this wave of immigrants from Kosovo at the beginning of this year. I mean, these people were visible, but they are not so active, not so present, and the price have plummeted, I would say, for the services, for a very simple reason. Many of these migrants, as just said your guest, are very, very qualified, and they are totally able to use the most modern technological tools which are readily available for them. And this is the cell phone with the access to Google Maps. And many of these migrants cross the border on their own using the maps that are readily available on the internet on ordinary telephones. So there is smuggling. There are some stories of smuggling. There was a very terrible affair of smuggling in Macedonia about 2 weeks ago with one crime lord rapting the migrants and asking them ransoms to free them. This was stopped by the Macedonian police. So there is criminal activity, but the smugglers are not as active as they were in previous waves of migration, just because of these technological tools that are now widely available.
Laurent Rui in Belgrade, many thanks. There's the east-west route we've been talking about, and of course there's the north-south route. Earlier this week, migrants taking advantage of protests by striking French dockers at the entrance to the Eurotunnel in Calais, in the French port, to rush trucks bound for Britain. The images prompting the UK Prime Minister to announce there'll be more means at border control and to point the finger at Italy, where most of those migrants entered Europe. Tom Waterhouse has more.
Day after day, night after night, police and truck drivers in Calais battle to stop this. Migrants jumping aboard lorries bound for the UK. But this week has been more difficult than usual after a strike by French ferry workers brought the port city to a standstill. Services were suspended through the Channel Tunnel, which led to queues of traffic outside and more targets for the migrants to prey upon. The British Prime Minister David Cameron said scenes like these were totally unacceptable.
Questions to the Prime Minister.
Speaking in Parliament on Wednesday, he announced a series of measures, including the creation of a 90-strong task force and 16 million euros of investment to bolster the border.
All these things can make a difference, and we should work with the French very closely. There's no point either side trying to point the finger of blame at each other. This is a strong partnership that we have in place, and we should keep it that way.
Cameron didn't shy away from pointing the finger of blame at Italy, who he says should be doing more when migrants first arrive in Europe. But Prime Minister Matteo Renzi was quick to defend his country's abilities.
This is not just a problem of numbers that we can't handle alone. It's also that Italy can't keep being viewed from the outside as a country of jokers and that we're ridiculous and grotesque.
The port and the tunnel might have got back to normal, but the migrant problem still hangs over the town. This Thursday, Cameron has scrambled the government's Emergency Response Committee, COBRA, to draw up plans if the situation worsens, with fresh strike action already planned.
Sajjad Karim, do you take Matteo Renzi's frustration to heart? And was it fair of David Cameron to point the finger at Italy that way?
Well, I think the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom was simply pointing out quite the travel routes that have been taken by the vast majority of people. And this is all fact-based, evidence-based statement that he is making. Look, I have actually personally been to Calais in order to view and see what is happening there, and I went a few weeks ago. And there I personally witnessed many people trying to get into trucks that were heading towards the United Kingdom through the Channel Tunnel. The people that I observed, the entirety of them, were all quite clearly people that had travelled from various parts of Africa, and they had come through Europe. And the majority of them had actually arrived in the first instance in Italy.
Arrived in a first instance in Italy, but Italy, as we know, is swamped in an unprecedented way. And by the way, Sajjad Karim, it's not just Britain, it's the French also who've been pushing back those migrants at the border at Ventimiglia on the Riviera. What's your reaction when you see the French pushing them back?
Well, we have here an unfolding situation which is so fluid. And as Frontex itself has said, that it's getting to a stage now where really this is a humanitarian crisis in the making. Now, many of the people that we are talking about here, some of them are genuine refugees, but many of them are economic migrants who, through various trafficking routes, have made their way onto EU soil and are now trying to move through borders in very irregular ways. And that sort of activity must come to a halt.
But the statistics show that a great majority of the ones taking that north-south route come either from Syria or places like Eritrea. They are fleeing for a good reason.
The opening part of the questioning that you put to me was specifically about those who are trying to access the United Kingdom through Calais. Now, those people are not within the category that you are describing. Of course, the people that are entering into Italy in the first instance, the vast majority of those people are from Syria and from Libya. But those that are trying to exit from France through the Calais border to the United Kingdom are not of that category.
Let me ask you, Ursula Plasnik, because in Calais we see all types. We have seen Eritreans there. I've personally seen people from Iran, Kurds, Iraqis, people from Afghanistan who want to go to Britain. And it's very difficult because in some cases there's a genuine full-blown civil war like in Syria. In other cases, though, how do you distinguish between what is a migrant, what is an asylum seeker?
Well, not at first sight and not by looking at them. And this is the point where I don't agree with the previous speakers. How can he tell what the background of those people, even in Calais, is? He is right on one point, which is that illegal migration in the sense of for economic reasons, looking for a better perspective is not one of the reasons that can be the basis for a recognition as a refugee according to the Geneva Convention. So we will have to screen. This is why I have tried to emphasize in my previous statement, we will have to find better ways of quickly finding out, with the help of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, in control and as an advice giver and co-decider, we will have to find out better ways of early recognition and early screening in order to treat the various groups of people accordingly. But this does not take away...
And on that point, when you heard earlier the spokesperson for the Hungarian government say that they're swamped and they don't have the means to screen people.
This, I think, is an important point, because we see all over Europe, including in France and on the border between France and Great Britain, we hear also from the side of governments cries for help and the feeling that they are overwhelmed by a situation that is new and we have not had it before. So we will only be able to cope with this situation on the basis of rule of law by having the procedures that are foreseen by the various legal instruments. And in the meantime, we will have to find new ways to give shelter. There is a huge debate in Austria going on whether we should put up the asylum seekers in tents, whether we should open unused barracks. This has important dimensions on the domestic political side, but we will have to lead this discussion. I think this is part of our self-respect as Europeans. We have been helped in our history. We have helped others, Eastern Europeans, and I'm sad that they are not, they seem to be reluctant to contribute to that general effort that is necessary now. We have, the whole of our societies will have to make a major effort. Every once in a while, once in a generation, there is a huge effort that has to be undertaken, and this is the moment where we have to do it.
Sort of a moral obligation?
It is not only a moral obligation, it is an obligation according to our own basic charter, to our own basic understanding of European values, what this European exercise is all about. But we have to support those who, like Hungary, might find themselves in a situation where they are technically overwhelmed. We have to look for fast aid possibilities for those who find themselves in a difficult position. But this should not justify a political statement, we are not fulfilling our obligations any longer. It should be interpreted as a cry for help, for technical help, for support, for staff, for trained personnel, but not overdone as a political reaction. We are closing our eyes, our minds, and our frontiers.
Public opinion is for sending them back. Sajjad Karim, we recently had a general election in Britain where we saw the anti-immigrant UKIP party rise. We have here in France the National Front. Is Europe failing in its moral obligation in this instance?
Well, the rise of populist parties based upon immigration as a rallying cry is something actually which is quite alien to European values. But at this moment in time, particularly bearing in mind the economic difficulties and the prevailing winds that are blowing throughout the European Union as a result of that, people are finding that message to have a certain attraction. However, I do fundamentally believe, as Ursula has just stated, that Europeans, both as a continent and our people, ultimately, I think will come to stand in order to ensure that we do stand by our values. And when it comes to the current challenges that we are facing, once it is presented as a genuine humanitarian situation rather than some sort of immigration problem, then I believe the societal attitudes will begin to change. And that is where there is a real need for political leadership today.
Sajjad Karim, one final question. We're speaking on the day when the Queen of England is in Germany, and she made a speech on Wednesday evening where she called for a more united Europe. I know you yourself are convinced that Britain should stay in the EU. What will happen on the issues like migrants if Britain leaves the EU?
Well, look, at this moment in time, Francois, we are completely committed and engaged in making sure that we as a country actually undertake a process which we genuinely believe is not just going to be for the betterment of United Kingdom's position within the European Union, but in fact should lead to a reformed and better European Union overall. At this moment in time, that is our complete commitment, and that is where we are putting our complete energies.
All right, many thanks for that, Ursula Plasnik. On this issue, where's Europe going? Because we see the recrimination over Greece, we see the recrimination over migrants, and Austria and Hungary had a tiff this week, and we see the chance of a Brexit. There's a feeling that something's coming undone.
This is a stress test, and it's a multiple stress test. But this is also growing pains in the sense of Europe becoming more of a political union, becoming more of an economic union on the other side. And we are now in the fine print. We now have to figure out what has to be done on the national level on certain issues, what can be done, reasonably done, realistically done on the European level. How do the European institutions chime into this, and how do we continue to write the script under democratic conditions of our own future? And I'm quite, contrary to a lot of people, I'm quite confident, because it's extraordinary, the stress tests that the European integration has already been through. And I want to be optimistic, and I'm deeply convinced we will manage to come to grips with this crisis management situation as well.
All right. A prophecy there from Ambassador Plasnik. Many thanks for joining us. I want to thank as well Sajjad Karim for being with us from Manchester.
Thank you.
Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, Francois. Of course, every day now we're seeing reports in the media, online and elsewhere about the migrant crisis in Europe. And just to take a look at some of those reports in the media today online, you have a report in Le Monde, which has actually classified all of their reports since January on the various different faces of the migrant crisis in Europe. You can see it here. It's an interactive page from Eritrea to Calais, coming from Africa and the Middle East. Hundreds of thousands have tried to gain access to the EU since January, mostly looking for refugee status, they say, risking everything to come to Europe and set up home here. And you can get an insight, for those who read French, into any number of different situations. Just to show you one, this particular report is a three-part report coming from their correspondent in Greece and a photographer, Myrto Papadopoulos, and they were looking at migrants trying to escape the crisis in Syria.
And we see that Balkan route that we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely, and it's a piece explaining step by step how they make their journey, the amount of money that they have to pay to people smugglers, tens of thousands of euros often, leaving the Turkish port of Bordom, arriving on a Greek island of Kos, and then having to cross borders to their end destinations, often in the north of Europe. So a lot of reports like that in the media, from Finland to Sicily to Calais to Ventimiglia. So it's really a problem that is touching, or a crisis that is touching many different parts of Europe. There's a report also today, a photography report in The Guardian, a photograph taken by Jason Florio. Now, this is a pretty interesting piece, Francois, because he explains the story behind this photo. This is a migrant boat in the middle of the Mediterranean off Libya. Libya with 561 people on board. And as the photographer explains himself, at first you just see a mass of people. But then when you look a little bit closer, you pick out different nationalities, women and children, all just bobbing around in a vulnerable situation. As he said, mostly Eritreans and Ethiopians. And he says, having spent many years in Africa and being close to people who go through this situation, he said many have horrific stories of being raped or robbed along that journey.
Yeah, these are the ones that made it.
That's right, who made it this far. And he says he's embedded with an organisation called the Migrant Offshore Aid Station, MOAS, or MOS, for 2 weeks. This is a guy who's worked in war zones in Afghanistan, refugee camps in Somalia, and he says what he has seen in this migrant crisis has shocked him to his core. And when you get access up close and personal to any of these people, you can't but wish that they would have some sort of a better life. Then, of course, it's also the satire too, because this is ripping cordial diplomatic relations apart. In some, you could say, come on, froggies, let's see a bit of backbone here. This is, of course, in reference to the migrant crisis in Calais, where I suppose there's quite a bit of tension as to who gives what in terms of resources.
People at Calais City Hall furious over what they see as a lack of help from them.
That's right, the UK outside the Schengen zone, and feeling that this perhaps isn't fully their problem, even though a lot of these migrants, they want to gain access to the UK eventually. Austria reintroducing passport controls, Hungary building walls, controls on French-Italian borders at Ventimiglia. Schengen is dying, says one Twitter user. This is Martin Schulz, the EU Parliament the European Parliament President, who's been tweeting about this today. With Schengen, we opened the borders in Europe. Now we need a common asylum and migration policy. So really, Schengen is the big question, I think, politically speaking, regarding this, Francois.
All right, many thanks, James Creedon. Once again, I want to thank our panel for joining us. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.